As I've said numerous times on this channel, often the hardest thing to do, at least for most people, is to admit to your own faults. To say, maybe in this situation it was me. There's probably a lot of mitigating factors that reduce your responsibility, but at a certain level, I take part of the blame for this. If I had have acted differently, things would have turned out differently. And I think there is a tendency to just kind of try to foist that off on someone else or to foist it off on society or that kind of thing. And that's not to say it isn't often or even in a majority of cases like that. But in the cases where it is your fault or at least partially your fault, if you refuse to acknowledge that, if you refuse to come to terms with that, I think it's going to hurt your ability to interact with others and even kind of interact with yourself in the long term. So today I wanted to talk about this in the context of interpersonal relationships. Because I think there is a bias among most people that if a relationship goes sour, like a business venture doesn't work out, you stop being friends with someone, you get into an argument or a fight, of blaming the other person for it and saying they're 100% responsible, I'm 0% responsible. Like, an example of this is when it was obviously Tonka's fault that the fight with Worski didn't happen, and he said he was 20% responsible and it was 80% Worski's fault. It clearly was his fault in that situation, but he refused to accept responsibility, at least at that time. I think he eventually did, but you get what I mean. And accepting responsibility doesn't always mean self-criticism per se. Oftentimes there are toxic or bad people that you need to get out of your life. Maybe your girlfriend is super emotionally manipulative. Maybe you have a friend who just puts you down and uses you as a source of cheap labor. Maybe your boss is abusive. Maybe your parents are like degenerate drug addicts, and even though they're your parents, you really need to cut them off. Ending a relationship with these people isn't necessarily a bad thing. It may be a very good thing. But I think in general it's kind of problematic to discount your own agency in the whole endeavor. And I think that's something as I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot better at. It's made it's made it a lot easier for me to interact with others. Having that like level of self-awareness, like going, okay, maybe I was irritable that day, maybe I was wrong about that, maybe I could have handled that a bit better. And as you kind of gain the insight and experience over time from kind of taking a long hard look at yourself, I find you get a lot better with social situations and better with interpersonal relationships. Like once you learn how certain people react to maybe certain sarcastic comments or I told you so's or things like that, even if maybe you're trying to like flatter them or apologize to them, etc., you get to kind of figure out the way that person reacts to those different things. And sometimes in life you just have to play the game. Like sometimes you just have to suck up, or sometimes you just have to not talk about certain things. So you have to behave in a certain way. And you can like whine and complain about it. And there's nothing wrong with whining and complaining. God knows I do it a lot. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to look at the realities of the situation. Do you need this person either on an emotional, familial, or economic level, like say your boss? And how can you live with it without, I guess you could say, compromising yourself and who you are too much? And these are difficult issues. Something my father always used to tell me is he'd say, Argent, you have to pick the hill you're going to die on. It's if you're going to lose your career in maybe like interpersonal relationships or something, you have to make sure it's on something that like actually matters. It's not just like some argument over who gets the last cookie or something. It has to be something of like moral or just something of bigger importance. And like I said, in a lot of these cases, these people might be people you should get out of your lives and you should refuse to associate with. Like in my life, as I've said in the past, there's certain family members that I refuse to be around. My parents and sister don't have that same perspective as me. But a lot of them have like committed crimes. Like as I said, my one cousin kicked my uncle down the stairs and then broke his ribs by stomping on him. So I refused to talk to her. I refused to talk to my aunt who stole like millions of dollars from my uncle. I refuse to talk to another one of my uncles who mentally abuses my mother and convinced my grandmother to try to push my grandfather down the stairs to kill him. And stuff like that. Like, I actively chose in a lot of cases to sabotage my relation. I don't even know if sabotage is the right term. But some of these people I just said, I think you're a horrible person. I think you're a bad influence on my family. And some of them have I've kind of become their arch nemesis. Like, I know my uncle always complains to my mother about how, like, I took part in ruining his life because I called him like a whiny bitch who just blames everybody else for his personal failings, and he's still angry about that to this day. And, like, was that his responsibility, like his fault or mine? I mean, partially it's his fault for just being kind of a shitty person, but I'm willing to accept my part in it, that I kind of hurt that relationship between my mother and her brother. And I kind of made it to a point where he can't really come over for dinner anymore, but I'm okay with that. And to me, that's fine. Like, and in university, and this is kind of something, like, I used to blame uh, all my friends for, all my former friends in university for abandoning me when I became like a normie conservative and I started to get interested in Christianity. Now, some of it was their side. Some of it was just they really hated Christianity, and they really hated conservatives, to the point they didn't want to associate with anybody. Like, I remember when I lost my last few friends from university when I supported Trump, and they just said, we don't want to associate with you anymore. One of my friends, I made a joke about gypsies, and he had been like my best friend since like grade 4, and he abandoned me over that and said he never wanted to speak to me again. So, I mean, in some cases that was them, but in other cases there was people who I admit I just broke off my relationship with. And looking back on it, I can say it was, if it was largely my bad. Well, not my bad, but is a decision from my point of view as much as it was a decision from their point of view. Like, as I said, one of them was distributing like porn of the Virgin Mary having sex with the Pope. One of them idealized serial killers and was trying to like promote that worldview. He was also wore like Soviet regalia all over the place and talked about like a communist revolution. And just a lot of them were like that. They just were engaged in really shitty behaviors. And, like, I know I'm not perfect. I've done lots of crappy things in my life. But at a certain point, you just have to go, what's best for you personally? And I think you have to just learn to own it. You can say, yes, it was partially because they're shitty people, but it was also a decision I made. And I think unless you kind of look yourself in the mirror and you kind of acknowledge your role in this whole thing, you're never really going to become a full adult person. You're never really going to improve and get better with dealing with others. Once again, most of life is external. There's not a lot you can really do about it, but you can control your own actions. And for what it is, you just have to try to own them, I guess. Own them either in the sense that you're happy about what you did, or you maybe aren't happy and you can try to learn from that. So sorry if that was kind of a rambly video, but hopefully that made sense to people. So, as always, this is Argent. We must dissent.